So that was just a tidbit of a podcast that we worked with Atlas Obscura on. And it's really cool. You should listen to it. I won't give all the details, but I really like that we used the example of our cyclorama because I think that it echoes and sort of mirrors what our population is in Atlanta, in that it's not from Atlanta, but it now calls Atlanta home, and it had a really interesting journey from being conceived and built to being broken down and then restored in Atlanta, and now it stands this really impactful piece of the past that still has a lot of meaning today. And I think it's very appropriate because a large percentage of our population are transplants in Atlanta. So, and I think in general, Atlanta's population is extremely diverse, creative, they are energetic and curious, and that is a byproduct of the fact that Atlanta can't really be defined by its topography or a particular lifestyle. And so instead, we are many things to many people, but our through line is innovation, art, authenticity is a big one. That word has been out for a while now. And the most important part of telling that story is really digging into the meat of what is Atlanta and all of those different segments for all the different reasons that people are there. We partnered with Atlas Obscura at a very strategic and serendipitous time because we were running our On a Different Level campaign. And the idea of that campaign was to reach into these segments and uncover the deeper story, the more meaningful stories behind the story that we were telling. And I think the Atlas sort of embodies that, and that they tell a story that cannot be told by AI because what is intrinsic to it is the human connection, and it's interesting, and it's very different, as you'll see very soon. And it also shines light on a part of Atlanta, the Atlanta brand, that can't be duplicated. And it's an important point of differentiation for us because it's uniquely our story. It's uniquely Atlanta. And that slide that you had with the photos. Yeah, is that up now? Okay, cool, yeah. So this one's really cool. The Doll's Head Trail. This is like a really interesting, very obscure, kind of creepy path that a lot of people, it's funny because when we talk about authenticity, I think of this because we were thinking of including it in our 50 fun things. That's a whole different story. But when the idea hit the table, a few of us cringed, like, oh, do we really want to show Doll's Head Trail? And I think that feeling is what you need to press into if you want to be authentic, so that it doesn't just become a buzzword. If you feel a little offended or you are offending someone, that may be you being authentic. And so I think that's important that we included that there.
It's the top place in Atlanta in the Atlas, the Doll's Head Trail.
See, I didn't even know that. See, I'm finding out metrics now, and it makes sense to me. Also, the tiny doors beside it, sort of a stark contrast, is this very whimsical, imaginative idea. And Karen Anderson Spencer? She added a last name, but Karen Anderson started this tiny doors, and her idea was that you never know what's behind the door. That's for your imagination to tell you what's behind it. And they're located all around Atlanta. They're all have different themes. And a fun fact about it is that Cirque du Soleil, you may have heard of them, have made Atlanta one of the stops along their tour from Montreal. And they are actually wanting to work to have their own tiny door put in Atlantic Station. And talk about whimsy and fun. That's pretty impactful. So, yeah.
So those are two of the places that we feature on Atlas Obscura in Atlanta. And that's our whole mission at Atlas Obscura is to inspire a sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. We're also, as the tagline of our book puts it, the definitive guide to the world's hidden wonders. And so when we were talking with EJ and Andrew and Sharitha and Joanne at the Atlanta CVB about what we should do together, we came up with this idea of just really leaning into these really unique, lesser-known places just the most unique attractions in Atlanta that people don't know about. So not the Coca-Cola Museum, not the aquarium, but places like the Tiny Doors and the Cyclorama. And this background here is the Sister Louisa's Church of the Ping Pong Emporium, which is a dive bar where religious kitsch meets Southern identity meets queer culture. It's a pretty special place.
So obscure.
We also realized that Atlanta was actually underrepresented on our website. So for those of you who don't know us, we host this database, the Atlas of World's Hidden Wonders. And there were only 45 listings in Atlanta, which, you know, for a city of its magnitude and just offerings from everything from culinary to the arts, green spaces, it just wasn't enough. The Atlas has been growing for a decade and a half now through kind of a hodgepodge of user-submitted tips and our editors and working with many of you to sponsor editions, but for whatever reason, we just didn't have that much in Atlanta. So we decided to focus this program on beefing up the Atlas. We made the podcast about the Cyclorama, and then we decided to add 14 new places to the Atlas. So we wanted to share a couple highlights from those new places that made it into this campaign. So Dr. Bombay's Underwater Tea Party is a cafe and used bookstore that raises money to fund women's education in Darjeeling, India. It's a very whimsical place with used books all covering all the walls and like parasols and bird cages hanging from the ceiling. And you can eat anything from like clotted cream and scones to samosas there. Another place we added was the Wren's Nest, and this is the oldest house museum, I believe, in Atlanta. It was the former home of Joel Chandler Harris, who was the journalist who made a name for himself in the 1800s, traveling around the South. He was a white journalist going to plantations and writing down the folklore that he heard there, and he published, you may be familiar with the Brer Rabbit stories, that was his work. His home is now a museum that's dedicated to, and a cultural institution dedicated to the tradition of African-American oral folklore and all oral folklore, and you can go there. If you go there on a Saturday, you can see a live storytelling performance.
Very cool. I picked this one because I love this one. Not a whole lot to say other than that this is another living piece of history, much like Cyclorama, much like some of the other things that we talked about. This is the ultimate sort of date night idea. PG date night, of course, because there are children here and cameras, so don't get any ideas. But it's just a fun way to experience some of the new films that come out from the comfort of your car, a few snacks, pull in. It gets a lot of positive sentiment across social media, which I do a lot of time on, so had to be mentioned.
This one did really well in the campaign on social media. People love a drive-in, an old-timey drive-in.
See, I know what I'm doing sometimes.
Yeah, you're in charge of that, right? Yeah. The Rondo Distributing Company, also known as Lucky Candle Company, is an Atlanta institution. It's been around since 1944. You can go here for any of your spiritual needs. If you have a case of unrequited love, or you need to put a hex on one of your neighbors, this is your shop. The walls are filled with candles and books and bottles. And the journalist who wrote this up for us, I caught a really fun line in the write-up. It's the kind of place where if you go in and you see a box labeled monkey paws and you ask if you can open it, you'll be politely told that you may not. So that's the Rondo Distributing Company.
And then the consulate, this is a really cool one. So every 90 days, they spin the globe and pick cuisine from somewhere on the planet. You never know what that is, but it will be done top notch. It is it's a luxury restaurant, so it's at a little bit of a higher price point, but this is the kind of experience we're talking about, and that it speaks to the diversity within Atlanta, that you can find food from all over the world there and enjoy it. Also, the cocktails. I'm a bourbon guy, and they do a really nice bourbon cocktail.
That's the place I'm going next time I come to Atlanta.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, like, we got highbrow and lowbrow. Like, I think the point is that it's niche or interesting or obscure or unique in some way. There's not a price point inherently associated with that. So this campaign, as we said in the session title, had, I think, 15 million impressions. the content. So when we add places to the atlas, we distribute them like a branded content campaign. They get guaranteed traffic and all of this. We had, I think, something like 300,000 page views. But what I really want to talk about results-wise is the engagement, because I think that's what we see. That's where we see that it's working, that we chose the right stories, right? So the average time on page for these 14 new pages we added was 5.5 minutes, which is 5.5 times the travel industry average. So, and it's also higher than our editorial benchmark for places in our atlas. People really loved reading about these really special places. We also saw a really high engagement rate, particularly on Instagram, about 4 times the industry average. And the podcast episode, this is my favorite, had a 103% playthrough rate, which means people not only listened to the whole episode, they rewound and re-listened to some of the episode. So we love to see that. We also saw a halo effect from this attention on Atlanta and these really unique places in Atlanta. We saw, even after the campaign ended, people spending more time and learning more and looking for more about Atlanta. So this campaign increased the Atlanta representation on our site by 32%. If you're a logged-in user, which is a small subset of our visitors, but it's like the really engaged ones, maybe some of you are in the audience have accounts on atlasobscura.com, you can mark places that you've been or that you want to go. And we saw that 14%, so let me back up. From before the campaign and then from 3 months after the campaign, we saw a 14% increase in the number of been-theres across all of the pages in the Atlas in Atlanta. And we've been adding places to the Atlas in Atlanta since 2009. So this is actually like a huge, really fast uptick in people saying that they want to go to Atlanta, or that they've been there. And then we also had 15% saying that they want to go, 15% more. We saw a 22% increase in the number of unique visits to Atlanta pages after the campaign ended. So this had nothing to do with us promoting these pages. We measured this monthly uniques for the 3 months post-campaign versus the 3 months pre-campaign, and we saw a 22% lift. We also saw more people searching for Atlanta by 25%. So I think, again, giving them more fodder, Atlanta was on the mind, and this really had a lasting impact. It also meant that we were giving people more to see on the website. So inherently, we saw this increase in search depth. For people searching Atlanta in our search bar, then there was an 86% increase in the number of pages that they visited after that search. And one more stat for you, a 14% increase in the session duration for people landing on the main Atlanta page. So all this to say, focusing on these types of really unique attractions did the job during the campaign. We had a really successful content campaign, great engagement metrics, and now there's more attention continuing to the city. I'll say one more thing, which is that our creative teams are using the Atlas as IP, and they get their ideas from places that get added to the Atlas. So we actually saw, part of the campaign was the Battle of Atlanta Cyclorama podcast episode on our podcast. But our team, just independently of us, saw that wren's nest place in the Atlas and made a podcast episode about it. So you basically got a bonus podcast episode.
We did. I listened to that one too.
Which is a lovely episode. It goes really into the nuance of like the whole Brer Rabbit stuff that I did not know about beforehand. So I think our message here is really to not be afraid to look for these types of really interesting, offbeat, maybe quirky places, and to find your own cyclorama.
That's it, and I'll add one quick thing. I always joke with you that it's my idea, but that just goes to show that you all take the time to understand our brand and you do the things that we would want our audience to see. And I think it's important that we say that too.
And you guys, your team suggested a lot of these places. We love working with the local teams because you know all the places in your destination that we don't know about. So
thank you.
Thank you.